inviting me to come here to talk tonight, and to all of you as well for coming. I've been researching Agenda 21 for a few years now, and I have a website where you can go and read about this information plus more. And if you didn't catch something tonight, you can go there and look it up and read more about it. And for those of you who want to take some notes, write down questions to ask. There's some paper up here. Anybody need paper?
Anybody need a pen?
So my goal is to give everyone a better understanding of Agenda 21, how our government is subservient to the United Nations, how Agenda 21 has been implemented, the advancement of Agenda 21 with Agenda 2030, which maybe some of you haven't heard about, how the U.S. is being run by the UN. We are under control of the UN down the line all the way. We're going to go over 3 issues today: the Twin Falls Vision 2030 plan, the BLM, and water. Agenda 21 has been implemented in all those areas. I'm a native Idahoan. I grew up mostly over in the southeastern part of the state and spent a lot of time up in Island Park. So I have a tremendous desire to try and get this stopped because I love my state. I'm also going to pull a Marco Rubio on you. My mouth is really dry, so every once in a while I'll be taking a sip. Just as another warning, I'm not very politically correct. Tom can attest to that. Some of the information that may be disturbing to you to hear, but I'm in the same dilemma with my line of work. This is not a personal attack on anyone or an accusation of participation in this agenda. And I'll try to finish in time to give you the opportunity to ask questions. So how many of you know about Agenda 21? And how many of you feel like you really understand Agenda 21? Oh, okay, we'll try and help with that. How many here are city or county officials? Rascals.
Yeah.
Are there any state employees here? Any federal employees? Okay. What's this?
I'm an Army officer.
Oh. Okay, so.
There was a hand back here.
Yes, I saw him. So I am going to talk a lot about the federal government, but again, I don't want you to feel that I'm targeting federal employees or anything, because for me this is a agenda that's far above where we're at. So Agenda 21 is also known as Sustainable Development. It's a UN action plan for sustainable development. Defined sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. George H.W. Bush signed it in '92. Nancy Pelosi attempted to get it through Congress and legislation in '92, and she failed. It wouldn't go through. So President Clinton, implemented it in 1993 with the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And what he did is he brought in all the federal agencies and said, I want you to integrate sustainable development from the UN into your policies and laws. And that's what they've done since that time. So we've been at this, 24 years? If you actually look at federal legislation, you can actually see the UN Sustainable Development all the way through it. So that legislation filters down to the state, they pass it on down to the counties, and they pass it on down to the cities. And that's one mechanism, the way we've been infected with Agenda 21. So I want to go a little over just how they're doing it besides the federal government. The goal of the UN is to control all aspects of human activity. And they're doing it in 3 pillars, but I threw a 4th one in there. The first one is the economy, and the goal here is to redistribute wealth, which they've been doing, and that's one of the reasons America is going bankrupt. So I would like to read something here. Here are the words of the former United Nations climate official, Ottmar Edenhofer. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore, with problems such as deforestation or the ozone hole. So what is the goal of environmental policy? We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. That's what they're doing to us. It has nothing to do with climate change. It has nothing to do with species protection. All of that is irrelevant. It's the ruse in which they're using to take the wealth from us and redistribute it and control it. And that's from the UN person himself. There was another lady, but I won't bring her up. They're trying to move us to a resource-based economy from capitalism, and they're succeeding in do that. They're moving forward with that. As far as the social aspect goes, they want everybody to have social justice. They want us to be multicultural, and I think the people here in Twin Falls can relate to that. They want us to have an attitude of global citizenry. They want us to have certain lifestyles. They want to define our rights. They want to control our health care. They want to control their education, in which they've already taken over the higher education, and now with Common Core they've gone down to the elementary level. And they want human settlement creation, which they're actively doing here and across the United States. As far as the environment, the ruse is the climate change, and the reason is to control all land and all the resources. And the education piece is there, and they've been indoctrinating us for years on sustainable development through the media, through training, and through education. So they've been feeding this to us through all those avenues. Marco Rubio. So non-governmental organizations were actually started by the United Nations. They're also known as nonprofits. Most of your environmental groups are UN NGOs or partner with the UN NGO. So when I say UN NGO, that's literally an organization or a nonprofit that is part of the UN. And the goal and the purpose of being a UN NGO is to promote the goals and objectives of the UN, including implementing and teaching sustainable development. So every time you see an environmental group fighting for these issues, they are somehow connected to the UN. So a couple of real connected ones are the Wilderness Society, Nature Conservancy, and a bunch of them. There are other nonprofits such as the Girl Scouts and the Red Cross. Those are traditional American institutions, and they partner with the UN. That is why you're seeing some of the changes with them. Professional organizations such as the American Bar Association, ACLU, American Academy of Pediatrics, U.S. Small Business Administration, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the AARP are also UN NGOs. They are implementing sustainable development UN objectives through their training, through their conferences, through their literature. And I'm just going to point out the American Planning Association because they were one of the first ones to partner with the UN. And that's the organization that they've been indoctrinating to have their city planners, who are members of the APA, to change and transform the way we live our lives in the cities. And I don't have copies for everyone, but if you want to look at the APA supporting the UN habitat and all that, you can see it right there. The Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, and Baptist churches are all UN NGOs. Foundations such as the Gates Foundation is a UN NGO. Educational institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Washington State, and Oregon State, they all partner with the UN. Now, business partnerships, and I am proud to say that I personally boycott all these, they also have a huge business partnership network, and I'm talking huge. Such businesses as Walmart, Kellogg's, Coke, Pepsi, McDonald's, Starbucks, Home Depot, Monsanto, Shell, they are all partners with the UN. So I just want to give you an example of what that means and so what they're partner with the UN. Remember the big to-do with Starbucks and they went to their straight red cup and they didn't have little Christmas things on it? The reason they did that is because in 2008, the UN got together with Starbucks and some of their other business organizations, and they want to integrate inclusiveness and diversity into your businesses. So that's how Starbucks chose to do it. Because a red cup is more inclusive of everybody and not separating out the Christmas aspect of it for people of that faith. So that's a real subtle example of why they did that. Now, United Health Group is actually a United Nations NGO. United Health Group runs United Healthcare. Who's got Medicare? Who's got AARP? Who's got TRICARE? Those are all run by United Healthcare. Those are all run by the United Nations through their partnership with United Health Group. If anybody's familiar with Optum, that is the Medicaid contracted organization for behavioral health in the state of Idaho. They're run by the UN through United Health. Pharmaceutical companies, Merck, Roche, GlaxoSmithKline, they're all UN partners. Major banks, Citigroup, Stanley Morgan, Bank of America, they're all UN business partners. News media, GE, Disney, MTV, CNN, TLC, they all partner with the UN. So they've been using these organizations for years to indoctrinate us into thinking and believing sustainable development, diversity, inclusion, and the whole piece of it. The Department of State and the Department of Education all have declared missions to the United Nations. You can go to their website, type in United Nations, and it'll come up Mission to United Nations. Most federal agencies partner with the UN directly or with UN NGOs, and many cities throughout Idaho partner with UN NGOs. UN NGOs are also Idaho lobbyists, so they have a lot of influence over our legislators. The UN itself has multiple organizations implementing Agenda 21 in partnership with all of these organizations. So tonight I'm going to talk about the Twin Falls Vision 2030 plan. Has anybody ever heard of that? Some of you. It was adopted apparently in 2009. So that's 7 years old. It's a little bit behind, but you need to be on watch for any updates or revisions of this plan because they're a little bit behind in some areas. So the primary goals or the issues that they were identified in this plan was forecasting future growth. They said that there was going to be 45,500 people by 2010. The actual growth was 44,125. They identified problems as urban sprawl, rapid development, lack of water, and a strained infrastructure. The comprehensive plan is a guiding document adopted by the community. So that means that you guys adopted this plan. So some elements that they looked at were land use, community design, housing, schools, public services, economic development, environment, parks, recreation, and transportation. And they're a little bit behind in some of these areas, not quite as advanced as 2030, but I can tell you what to look for. So the primary goals: limit future urban growth. This means an arbitrary boundary that has been established with no further development beyond it, and all development will take place within this boundary. And I'm going to show you a map of that. Encourage a wider range of residential uses. Single-family home development will be reduced, and instead apartment buildings, multifamily housing units, and for us people in my age group, that's the old fourplex and duplex. Townhomes, condos, and apartments above businesses will be encouraged for development, and that's where they're going to target all housing. Reestablish the downtown as the heart of the community. The downtown area will be an area where you can live above businesses, and the focus will be on creating an atmosphere where you can be able to walk to work and to services that you need, such as grocery shopping, seeing the doctor, going to the dentist. Anything that you need is within walking distance. The goal here is to reduce car use and expand biking, walking, and public transportation because they don't want you to use a car because that creates emissions and it contributes to global climate change, which is not true. They're also going to encourage the development of neighborhood centers. And basically, neighborhood centers are the same concept, that a neighborhood is composed of apartments and needed services that could be accessed by walking or riding a bike, and again, avoiding car use. Now, they mentioned in there strengthening the role of the College of Southern Idaho. That's where we're at right now, is that right? Okay, this area is weak because of the age of the plan, is 7 years old, but it's going to be brought forth in future plans or revisions of this plan because it's a preparation for the educational clusters that will be developed for future workforce development, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So the city said, okay, here, we got some solutions. We're going to create residential clusters. Residential clusters are more compact residential growth comprised of mixed housing. And remember a year or two ago when there was a big to-do over Obama is going to force us to live next door to so-and-so and, you know, all that. That's been in the works for years by the United Nations because the goal is that they're going to integrate and make diverse housing. And it's not a statement on discrimination when you say, I don't want to live like that. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the freedom of you making a choice about who you want to live around, where you want to live, what you want your housing to look like, how you want your yard to look. It's removing that freedom by forcing you to live in a situation where the person next to you is going to be pre-selected based on their minority status or their poverty status or their criminal status. It has nothing to do with discrimination. I will fight anyone who tries to say that that's discriminatory. I have the freedom right now to choose to live where I want, and that will be taken away from you. Mixed housing, housing with businesses and recreation all available within walking distance, and open spaces preserved with that area with parks. And I'll show you that in a minute too. Walking, biking, mass transportation, land use restrictions. What that means is preserving some land for non-development or use. And apparently you have a rim, you know that canyon you come in that the bridge is on, there's a rim around there. And they were talking about restricting any growth or use of that area as well. So that's what that was talking about. Protecting the environment with green spaces and open spaces, and having that growth boundary so that no further growth can take place outside of development, outside of that area for development. So, what are clusters? Clusters are based on regional development. One of the mainstays of the United Nations is to create regions. And the reason they want to create regions is because it takes your government representation away from you. Your government official that you elected is no longer in charge of everything. It's an arbitrary board of regional people that make decisions about the region. And I'm going to use Valley County as an example. Everybody knows where Valley County is, McCall, New Meadows, that area up there. They recently implemented Agenda 2030 in their human settlement, which is the name for cities, and created Valley County into a region. So there's no distinction between the individual towns and the city councils in that. It's a region now. And everything's going to be run based on it being a region. And I'll kind of bring that up as I go along. Clusters provide resources needed for everyday life. Housing, food, health services, education, and work, and there's different kinds of clusters. Clusters can also concentrate on related industries. So here you have, is it Chobani? That's one industry. And isn't there a lot of agricultural area around here?
There was.
I'll tell you why.
A lot of cows.
Okay, cows.
Landia.
4-letter word to the UN. So the different clusters are residential clusters, industrial clusters, education clusters, financial clusters, tourism clusters. And these are all made up to create the human settlement and create this little human settlement that operates for the industries. Within those clusters, everything is provided, the housing, food, health services, education, and work. Clusters for education, tourism, and industry, and the reason is humans are used to serve the industry needs. So we're going to educate you for that industry. We're going to educate you from square one to learn how to work over at Chobani. We're going to educate you square one to learn how to work in the agricultural field. We're going to educate you square one to learn how to work in the tourism field based on how we assess what your skill level might be. Now in Valley County, the new, what's it called? Western, it was so disgusting, I don't even remember what it is. They gave it this big fancy name, Western something, regional area. So we got a lot of forestry up there, and we've got agricultural, and we've got a lot of tourism up there. So they've designed their cluster with housing to to manage the workforce, future workforce for those industries. They have aligned the education system, and it says right in the plan, we're going to align the curriculum to the industry needs, starting pre-kindergarten. They're bringing in a bunch of health people, medical services, and of course, for some reason, they're going to need different housing. I don't know why that's in there. But this is all on the website, where you can go down through the different clusters of the Valley County plan and literally see how it lines up with Agenda 2030. So the UN Global Sustainable Development Report states educational policies supporting industrial transformation and inclusive growth through training and capacity building are critical to accommodating the rising demand for skilled labor. And as we go along, this will make a little bit more sense, because the direction they're taking us, they're going to need, the way the industry is going to transform, they're going to need the training for it. Where's my thing? So real quickly, the city plan calls for solutions, residential cluster development with mixed housing, mixed use, urban village infill, and what that means if you've got vacant lots or unused property. I got lost here and was driving somewhere on pole line out to the boonies, and on my way back I saw that they'd taken a large piece of land and they were building some apartments there or something. So any space is left, they're going to fill it with dense living situation apartments. Churches will be in the residential neighborhoods. All of these little clusters will have open space, meaning parks and little trails that you can walk on. There will be little to no single house development. The neighborhood centers will include the availability for you to go shopping, have your office there, daycare, restaurants, these little community nodes that you can walk to, and increased amenities in these clusters such as recreation, so something probably like a rec center or YWCA. Neighborhood commercial centers or nodes, they're placed at the edge of the cluster, so right now you've got Blue Lakes Boulevard, and that whole sucker is like commercial city. So what they're going to say, we're going to stop doing that because it takes too much space. We're going to put them in the outskirts of the residential clusters, and if you need to get to it, you can ride a bus or ride your bike. Downtown, they're going to create it into a mixed-use development with lofts and condos and apartments where people can live above those businesses that exist there already. So I'm going to show you a cluster example, and this is out of the book. It's on the website. You can go right into the plan. You can look at it yourself. The top, let's see, I brought my handy dandy. The top one here, that's 148 lots on 1/8 of an acre. And what they're going to do is they're going to make 220 lots on that 1/8 of an acre. An eighth? That's what it says in the book.
Can't do it.
Hey, I agree, but that's what it said in the book. I was kind of surprised.
There's just no way.
So let's pretend it's a half an acre or an acre.
Double that.
Yeah, let's double it up. So what they're going to do is they're going to take that and they're going to put 220 places to live, and they're going to open up more green space where you can walk around, right there, and that's how you live. And the darker orange is denser housing. This is where dense housing, the orange. So there's less open space there, which they created here by compacting you.
So you don't need any parking spaces?
No.
Of course not.
You'll be driving.
Of course not.
You'll be walking everywhere.
Okay, this is an urban village. This is all in this booklet on the website. This is an urban village, and you notice they put the townhomes there, there's mixed use there where the apartments are above the businesses. There's the garage. Then you've got your green space where you can walk around, a little plaza, but these are all services like grocery shopping, dry cleaning, and stuff like that on the bottom. Mixed use, mixed use, mixed use. Oh, these people are lucky they've got townhomes.
Where's the site?
I'm gonna be giving it to you at the end of each thing. You can write it down. It's there. Okay, so now we got a neighborhood commercial center. So here we've got mixed use, townhomes. You got for each townhome more open space, to walk around in the greenery. Commercial mixed use, so there's commercial businesses underneath there with the apartments on top. Here's townhomes, townhomes, townhomes. And then you can walk in this little commercial center. So that'd be kind of like downtown Twin Falls, how they're gonna transform it. This is your current box store. So here's, Fred Meyer, what's next to Fred Meyer? Walmart and Home Depot. So here's where you can park. There's a lot of parking for those two buildings, and this is what they're gonna do. They're gonna say, no, we can put 4 box stores for 5 and create more green space so that you can walk around, and then the parking's gonna be so impossible you can take a bus or ride a bike. That- Hey,
When you're 80?
hey, exactly. That's just another picture of that. Okay, so here's the map, and it's kind of hard to see, but again, you can go on the website. Here's the boundary, that dotted line. They're not gonna allow any growth beyond that. And I'm not sure what happened to that side, that dotted line doesn't go all the way up, but this green area here is open space, and if you're familiar with Boise, they're buying up land right and left on the outskirts of the city of Boise that nobody can use, but they're building trails where you can walk. The dark green is the commercial, or excuse me, the dark pink is commercial or retail area, and I was trying to figure out where you think Blue Lakes Boulevard, is that what it is? Where that might be, because that's where a lot of your commercial is right now.
Right there.
It's there?
No, that's the line, right? That line right there, right there.
Right there? Oh, coming in from that direction.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay.
Across the river.
Okay, so that's probably representative of a lot of the commercial retail space now. Now, the yellow is dense residential areas, medium dense. The gray is where the urban villages will be created and the urban infill. So I'm not familiar with this area, but I'm assuming there's pretty much a lot of vacancies out there, open land. So that's where you're gonna fill it up with people and housing. And then right here is industrial. What would that be? That's where Chilwaukee's at? Okay. And it takes up all that space?
And Cliff's right behind. Cliff Bar.
And what?
Cliff Bar.
A bar?
Cliff Bar. Cliff Bar.
It's
It's
a
like
nutrition
a
bar.
It's what?
It's a protein bar.
I can't hear all of you at once.
Cliff Bar is like a power bar that you put the food in your pocket.
Oh, okay.
and go.
Oh.
And they back their factories right behind Siobhan.
Okay, so this will be down the line, developed into your industrial cluster because you've already got industry existing there.
So is the city council behind all of this?
They're the ones that passed it.
I can give some insight, I've been on.
Okay, and I wanna get through it. I'll give you a chance, I promise. Okay, so the city took on this task with Landmark Design. They contracted with Landmark Design Company to come in and help with this. The city's plan focuses on the city's ability to provide water, establish a water service boundary, set limits on land use and development until infill parcels are developed and options for newer water supplies are created. So Landmark Design specializes in regional, there's that word again, and sustainable landscape architecture, community planning, and urban design. They use a rating system that's called CITES. It's a certification scam. It's a program by the United States Green Building Council, which is a United Nations NGO. It's modeled after another program called LEED, which is a United States Green Building Council certification program that promotes UN building designs. So in Boise, there's a construction company that does a lot of the downtown development that is LEED certified, and they build buildings with UN specifications that are green, which are far more expensive. So anyway, this company uses CITES rating system, and the certification states that you reduce water demand, filter and reduce stormwater runoff, improve air quality, human health, protect ecosystems, that ecosystems will keep coming up, protect wildlife habitat, reduce energy use, and increase outdoor recreational opportunities, and that is with the green spaces and your ability to walk on trails.
So this is basically, we the lands are being led to the slaughter?
I didn't hear you.
We the lands are being led to the slaughter?
That's up to you.
Prison is more like.
Okay, but wait. It gets more complicated. It's more complicated. So the Twin Falls Plan for Economic Development includes employment, industry, focusing on regional implications. And whoever participated in this plan development, apparently in the booklet itself it says that people didn't want regional development here. They didn't want mixed residential housing or anything like that, but it's still in the plan. Everything forward from 09 is going to be based on regional implementation. So they identify for economic growth or economic development current issues such as limited job growth, limited industrial opportunities, lack of communication infrastructure, limited regional cooperation, nobody wants to do it here, and limited support for mixed-use neighborhood centers. So this was, whoever participated in the development of this plan said, we don't want that, but yet the plan itself says that's what they're going to do. Each one of these areas, that's all part of Agenda 2030, every one of them. Creating jobs through economic development, bringing in industries to create those jobs, improving the communication infrastructure, creating regional development, and this kind of housing. And if you look at the Valley County plan, the regional plan there, it has all of it in that because there's just passed maybe a couple of years ago, so they're a lot more advanced than you because it's more recent. Other aspects to economic development for the Twin Falls plan support development of high-quality employment, commercial activities, and industrial development. They're going to bring industries in for high-quality employment and commercial activities. And they're doing that with Chobani. I read recently where they're going to expand or do something like that. Attract new businesses, that's part of Agenda 2030. Expand existing businesses, that's part of Agenda 2030. Develop tourism, that's part of Agenda 2030. And because this plan was developed in 09, it's a little short in these areas, so they're going to have to implement this in the updates of the plan. These areas are the focus of future clusters for industry, workforce development. And if you go to the website, you can read about what they've done in Coeur d'Alene and what they've done in Valley County, because they've done it in both those areas.
Question, who put this plan together here locally?
Your city council,
City council?
yes.
Did they know anything to do that?
Okay, and I'll write your questions down. I'll get to you. Yes, they do. Both Agenda 21 and 2030 call for the development of human settlements. That's the name given to the transformation of our cities. Every area mentioned in the Twin Falls plan is covered. So let's go to Agenda 21, Chapter 7. This is in 1992. Agenda 21, Chapter 7, Human Settlements. Sustainable land use planning and management. You've got that. Integrated provision of environmental infrastructure, water, sanitation, drainage, and solid waste. And you've got all that. I bring it up in the water deal. Okay. Facilitating the transition from rural to urban lifestyles and settlement patterns. Facilitating the transition from rural, or enhancing public amenities, protecting and rehabbing older buildings, historic precincts, that would be your downtown area. Promote environmentally sound tourism programs. They're a little weak in that area, but again, 7 years ago they would have been. Rural areas, unsustainable practices, exploitation of marginal lands, encroachment on ecologically fragile areas by commercial interests. That's why you've got the box stores that are going to be on the outskirts of the clusters. Result in environmental degradation. In other words, it destroys the land. Encourage a communal and a collectively owned and managed land. So those little green space areas, you're all going to share it in your little townhouses and your mixed-use apartments, and that'll be your area to share communally and collectively. Strengthen community-based land resource protection practices in existing urban and rural settlements, and they brought in landmark design to help with that. And encourage non-motorized modes of transport by providing safe cycleways and footways. Everything in Agenda 21 is here, folks, in your new plan. Now, urban planning and design. Now, didn't I just mention urban design? Landmark is a leader in landmark in urban design, something like that. Well, that's actually a UN Habitat word. urban planning and design at UN Habitat, and this is their picture of what that looks like. So, here you've got business with apartments above it, and everybody's going to their shops. Here you've got, the goal is to get you to grow your food on the roofs, and that's what that is, it's a little garden up on top of the roof there. They're pushing us towards renewable energy, so you've got your solar panels over there. More businesses here, and probably some housing mixed in with it. Here's your park, your little green space. Here's all the people walking everywhere. Here's this guy enjoying his little picnic on top of the roof with his flower. Okay? Doesn't that look like fun? That's Agenda 21. UN Habitat, which is basically in charge of the human settlements. They have 6 principles: promote high-density urban growth, promote sustainable, diversified, socially equal, and thriving communities in economically viable ways. Well, if you have everybody having the same 900 square foot apartment, and you're going to have diversified people living there because you won't have a choice, and you're going to have it economically viable because they'll walk to the store and services below them. Encourage walkable neighborhoods, reduce cars, optimize use of land, provide interconnected network of streets facilitating safe, efficient, pleasant walking, driving, and cycling. Foster local employment, local production, and local consumption. And that has a big deal to do with the agricultural piece. And provide a variety of lot sizes and housing types, so you can do fourplex or multifamily, a townhome, a condo, or an apartment. That's the diversity. Densities which support provision of local services. Okay, now, here we go, folks. Where's my helper? Okay, so this is a video, about a 3-minute video by UN Habitat, and I want you to tell me if they just didn't describe your 20 vision plan. If I can get it to work. Yo. Yes.
Cities generate over 75% of the world's wealth. This attracts lots of people looking for a better future. But more people need more housing. Lack of affordable housing means that living in slums is often the only alternative. There is now an increased need for basic services. These services are often expensive and don't work well. The consequence? Diseases and epidemics become the norm. People need to earn a living. If they can't find regular jobs in their city, they will look for money somewhere else. Informal economies boom, as do illegal activities. Many cities currently follow traditional urban planning with strict zoning. Residential over here, industries over there, commercial in the middle, more residential suburbs all around. The result is urban sprawl. Cities get wide. And wide means that people need to travel longer distances. How do they travel? Mostly by car. This results in huge jams. This slows down not only traffic but also a city's economy. Cities are big polluters. They account for as much as 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, the main cause of climate change. As a result, natural disasters and storms test the resilience of our cities more than ever. Loss of lives, destroyed property, and economic downturn are a global problem. In the face of all this, cities need to rethink themselves. Cities need to have a holistic, all-inclusive approach to their development so as to accommodate more people and provide equal opportunities for all. So what is a city that works? Cities need to get their street grid right, with sufficient intersections to ease traffic flow, enhance access, and interconnect the city. Cities need to embrace mixed land use, become more compact, blending residences, offices, shops, amenities. This cuts the need for long commutes. Cities also need to get their social mix right, promoting neighbourhoods with a variety of housing types for all budgets. Well-planned cities increase their job numbers by 15% by being just that, well-planned. But cities need to look beyond this, providing the right incentives for the economic sector to strive and focusing on providing jobs to the urban poor. Slums need to be upgraded and connected to the city, not only in terms of mobility, but also socially, to create a strong overall social tissue and foster inclusivity. Universal access to basic services is paramount. Cities also need to provide enough land for public spaces, at least 30% of their footprint. Public spaces are vital for social exchange. They are spaces for leisure, fitness and culture, and where citizens interact. Cities need to free themselves from the dominance of cars by setting up attractive, affordable public transport systems and promoting non-motorized mobility such as walking and cycling. That will not only reduce congestion, but also help to curb pollution. Cities need to become greener to help alleviate the effects of climate change and provide a clean environment for their citizens. At the same time, cities need to become resilient to the increasing adverse effects of climate change. All this makes for a happy city.
UN habitat.
Did they not just describe your vision plan?
They just described Soviet style.
They just described your vision plan. This is all straight out of the United Nations via your city planners. And again, I'm not accusing city planners of anything. They took a survey and found that about 80% of city planners had no idea how the APA was connected to the UN. Don't blame them.
City planners know anything about our constitution?
I don't know. No. So the city planners are trusted by the city council members to give us our guidance, not being aware that this is the direction they're headed, taking them. The federal legislation and the federal funding, and I'm telling you, you ought to look at federal funding sometimes, that comes into these cities mandate that this is the direction they go. It forces your city council members and your county commissioners to do this. Because if you don't do it, you don't get the money. Okay? So that needs to be recognized. And I wish that guy would have stayed because, you know, I think that's what he was going to talk about. And I understand that. I recognize that. But we've got to stop it. We've got to figure out a way to is this still on? No. We've got to figure out a way to keep our cities and communities the way we want to live in them and the way we want them to be without the federal funding. So this is the website, and that's going to be at the end of every one, so if you didn't catch it, that's fine. So next we're going to talk about the Bureau of Land Management.
I'm sorry, were you going to give us the website?
Oh, it'll be here at the end. It'll be here at the end, okay? It'll be back up. So, let's see, slideshow from beginning. Bureau of Land Management and the theft of resources. So, as we all know, the BLM has been a major focus in the news over the last little bit because of the Burns, Oregon situation. And I would like to try and explain exactly what's happening with the BLM and why these conflicts are occurring and what's been going on and what they're going to do. So here's the Department of Interior. And as you can see, that Department of Interior is made up of primarily resource-based agencies. You got U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Is it working? Am I talking loud enough? U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Land Management, Energy Management, Environmental Enforcement, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Geological Survey. So this is a really, is it on?
I don't know what we shut off or how it changed.
So this is a real resource-based organization in the federal government. I'm sorry? There's another mic? So, BLM has designated wilderness areas. Currently, Idaho BLM controls 514,812 acres of wilderness. And their definition of the wilderness is an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain, federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural condition. So in other words, you cannot go there and use it. So this is a picture of BLM land in Idaho. The yellow areas, that's BLM land, owned land. These darker areas here are designated wilderness areas. And you can see over there in Oregon. Look how much of Oregon they possess. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're somewhere right in here. Right? A little farther? Farther? Somewhere in there. So anyway, you're surrounded by BLM land, from what I can see. So, the conflicts with the BLM and the ranchers. Grazing rights. The BLM dictates where and when cows can graze. In Island Park, which is my playground, I was going through one of their plans over there, and they had a detailed description of where those cows could be, when they could be there, how long they could be there. It was that detailed. It's very detailed on grazing. Over the course of the years, there's been more restricted areas. It was restricted to begin with, but it's become increasingly restricted on where ranchers can graze their cows and how much they can graze them. So this is part of the reason there's been such a rising conflict with ranchers. Grazing fees, the ranchers are charged grazing fees. The BLM uses different formulas for the amount. The money goes to the BLM for non-structural improvements such as prescribed burns and structural improvements such as fences, wells, and pipelines. So one of the non-structural conflicts between the Hammonds and the BLM was the prescribed burns. The BLM was going through and doing prescribed burns, and it was coming awfully close to the private property of the Hammonds, so they lit a backfire on their property to offset that other fire coming onto their land. The BLM said that, well, you burned BLM land. They said they didn't. I don't know what the truth is. The point is that the BLM, from what I understand and from what I've watched on videos, is pretty reckless with their prescribed burns. And I'm not an expert in firefighting. I'm not an expert in this kind of thing, but I'm old enough to know when a fire is being controlled and managed and watched versus arbitrary burning. So that is one area of conflict. Another conflict that arose with the Hammonds was that the BLM was setting up barriers to their cattle for water and feed. Ranchers have to buy their water rights. The Hammonds had done that, and the BLM set a fence up and said you can't do that, so they were unable to water the cattle. That went to court. The Hammonds won because the county said this is their water right, it's county land or something to that effect. So basically, the story is that their water rights, they did have them, and the BLM restricted or blocked off their access to them. The BLM can also require the ranchers to make improvements separate from this, and then they have the ability to take title to those improvements from the rancher without compensation. Not paying grazing fees is the case of the Bundys down in Arizona. He says, I'm not paying the federal government, that's state land, I'm paying the state, and that's why he's in trouble. Water rights, the ranchers have to apply for those water rights. And there's conflict when it comes to crossing BLM land to get to that water. Over the course of time, the BLM has continued to reduce land allocation for grazing, using more restrictive regulations to protect habitat such as the sage grouse. This is an economic loss for the rancher, and the BLM can arbitrarily reduce at any time or eliminate grazing with claims of habitat and species protection. So what's the rancher supposed to do? He's got 100 head of cattle. The BLM comes in and says, we got to protect this ant over here. You figure it out. What's he supposed to do? They have literally destroyed ranching in so many areas, in so many states, because they want to get them off the land. And I'll tell you why. The BLM claims, and I'm not a rancher, but I can read this stuff and I can understand it. BLM claims that improvements are needed to improve watershed conditions, enhance wildlife habitat, which can then in turn enhance the operator's income generation abilities. And I did not understand that. Am I reading it wrong? What don't I get on this one? It's actually in the BLM site. So land degradation. The BLM blames grazing, recreational use, vehicles, and humans, which, okay. They claim that the losses include habitat, cultural areas, and the cultural areas are Like, let's say that at some time there was a native tribe that lived there, inhabited the area, and it's a sacred site because there was a burial ground or something like that, or like the hieroglyphics, you have those down here at Hagerman, right? Stuff like that. So that's the loss from all these other activities. As far as species go, it harasses them, and that's actually in there, they get harassed. I remember being harassed by skunks and bats and porcupines. I think it was quite the reverse. Because of all these activities, their nests are destroyed, and there's destruction of the riparian and wetland areas, and that's going to come up again. Resource management plans was a solution for this. Let's create a plan. So the resource management plans by the BLM are created from the Wilderness Act and the Endangered Species Act, and actually the Wilderness Act was actually written by the director of the Wilderness Society, which is a UN NGO. It's a real big one. It's been there from the 70s. The intent is to protect habitat and species and prevent land degradation. I looked at one of them, and there's regulations on motorized vehicles, rock climbing, livestock grazing, camping, hunting blinds, recreation permits, visitor restrictions, trail use, and bodily functions. They literally tell you where you can go, how you can go, number one, number two, what the requirements are. It's that obsessive.
There's no trace, you have to back it out.
Yes, I didn't want to bring that up, but you're right. So the one I looked at was the Hawaii Resource Management Plan, and that's on the website if you want to look into the requirements that I'm talking about. The BLM uses lists of endangered species from the International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and that is, the UN is their source of what species they consider endangered. They're getting it from the UN. They're not coming it up from Idaho. They're not coming up with it from the United States. They're coming up with it from the United Nations. Decertification. The United States Geological Survey definition is the alteration of arable land to dry, barren land due to prolonged drought, of course, or the deleterious effects of human intervention, including overgrazing, they hate cows, overpopulation, you're having too many babies, people, or destructive agricultural practices. And that's going to come up again too. Decertification is actually a fabricated word by the United Nations, by UNESCO, and that's the education organization. I look back at being really old, I look back in my 1960s dictionary, couldn't find that word, didn't exist. Tried a 1970s dictionary, didn't work, didn't exist. Closest I could come to it was desert. This is a made-up word by the UN. So on the website, there's a really good video by a gentleman by the name of Alan Savory. He's a PhD ecologist or some fancy degree. Anyway, he did a video that shows how land use maintains and protects and preserves land. It doesn't degrade it, it doesn't decertify it, it protects it. And what he says is, and it really makes sense, he says you've got to have grazing on there because when the cows walk across the ground, they till it up. Don't we till our gardens? And then they don't like standing in their own stuff, you know, so they walk and dump and fertilize. They dump their stuff and go till some more and dump their stuff, and they keep the grasses down so they don't catch on fire, dry and catch on fire. So grazing is beneficial to the land in keeping it healthy. And he shows you areas on there that are barren and dust, and he's drove some cows over it, and then it's lush, the water returned, the grass is returned. This is the truth behind land management. Using the land the way it's meant to be used. Not by the UN. We've got to protect it so it can decertify and become nothing. Don't get me started. Oh.
I don't think that's intended to be decertified. That's intended to be desert.
Yes, there's a deliberate movement by the UN to destroy our land. Don't get me started. Okay, so the Great Basin Restorative Initiative. there was a big fire, and it destroyed land, burned everything up. So we have to get in there and we have to restore that land, and restoration of land is a big deal with the UN. So there was a Department of Interior representative to the United Nations Convention to Combat Decertification. That's an organization, UNCCD. They have a special organization just for that. He was the Department of Interior representative to them. He came in and said, we've got to fix this. All this fire, we've got to restore the area. That's the restorative initiative. So this included the Hawaii upland area, which is an area that's also integrated with the sage-grouse conservation program. So we've already got land that's supposed to be conserved for the birds. And the reason the sage-grouse was listed on there in this endeavor was to keep it off the endangered list. It wasn't listed on there. They did this to prevent it from becoming on the list. So he went around and he fixed all this area because it had been destroyed by fire. So for all the alleged protection by the BLM, the 2015 soda fire decimated almost 400 square miles of land. Now this was in the area that was protected for the bird and for the grass and prevented from being grazed, et cetera, et cetera. It destroyed it. But the BLM can always come in and jump in and restore it. Gives them a job and be restored. Part of the fire was in the Hawaii upland area with over 400 acres of land destroyed, taking the sage grouse and the inhabitant with it, and the habitat with it. So the fire wiped out everything. And I do know that a lot of the grazers down there were really upset because it was an area that they were again prevented from going in and grazing in, so the grass grew high, got really hot and dry, and just blew up. And they were really upset because they could have prevented it. So the UNCCD is the driving force behind addressing decertification. So, we'll go back. Agenda 2030. Agenda 21, 1992, in Chapter 12, is devoted to decertification and fragile ecosystems. That word keeps coming up. It states combating decertification should be a goal of national governments, which they've got the federal government in their hands, and they identified the BLM and the USGS as two participating federal agencies who took on the task. In Agenda 2030, it's Goal 15, and I do have a copy of Agenda 2030 here. I only got a copy for you to look at, but if you want to look at Goal 15, the goal is to combat decertification again, restore degraded land, make the world land degradation neutral so it never happens, reduce degradation of natural habitats, prevent extinction of threatened species, reduce the impact of invasive alien species on land and water ecosystems, there's that word again, integrate ecosystems and biodiversity values into national and local planning, we've got that, increase financial resources, and the recommended budget for the BLM for 2017 is $1.5 billion.
For salaries only?
That's our big tax dollar.
No, it's to write the rules so you can't go on the land anymore. Come on. The UNCCD priorities include agriculture, water access, rangeland production, renewable energy, and to become a global authority on scientific and technical knowledge in the fields of anti-decertification work. The Agenda 2030 was intended to replace the 8 Millennium Development Goals, of which there's 17 with 165 targets. In reading through both these documents, 21 and 2030, it's an expansion and a much more aggressive approach for Agenda 21, in my opinion. So let's talk about ecosystems, because it keeps coming up. The BLM definition: natural processes and systems are intricately linked over broad expanses of space and time. So that means everything is connected to the ecosystem. Anybody know what a skeeter is? I don't even know if they exist anymore. You do. The fish need the water, the rabbits need the fallen tree to live in, the grass needs this to grow. Everything's intricately interlinked in the ecosystem. So you can't hurt one part of it without hurting another. It includes wetlands and riparian areas, And the BLM is creating land management plans to provide for protections for riparian areas, including BLM's no loss of wetland, riparian habitat, to maintain, restore, and improve riparian areas, etc. The United Nations Environmental Program expect wetlands to be, quote, integrated into decision-making as a vital component of the transition to a resource-efficient, sustainable world economy. They're going to take that land from you for their own economic benefits. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, of which the DOI is a member, Department of Interior is a member, is recommending members impose on its departments more conservation and preservation of wetlands. Let's see if I can myself. The BLM uses the IUCN Endangered Species, and the IUCN also has a list of ecosystems. And whatever the IUCN puts on those lists is what the BLM will use. So in 2002, the Johannesburg Summit, which was the UN meeting, defines U.S. responsibilities for land management as internationally accepted principles for environmental management and governments, influence use of land, dealing with water and wildlife habitat. The Endangered Species Act can constrain the use and development of private land. They're going to do this on your private land. So if you've got a bunch of acres and you've got birds that fly in or different kind of habitat that live there, they can come in on your private land and regulate you.
I wonder if you could get yourself declared as an endangered species on your own land.
I think it's worth a try. Government regulations, conservation easements. If anybody is approached by anybody about conservation easements, do not do it. Contracts or other instruments that arise out of a law, custom, and operation of private markets serve to regulate both landowners and society's right to use land. This is coming out of the UN. Everybody looks to the BLM, DOI. They're doing it because of the United Nations are calling for it.
What is the,
Because the goal of the UN is to control all resources and land and people. And this is how they're doing it through the federal government.
so how do they enforce that?
They make a regulation. The BLM makes a regulation.
And hire somebody for that.
Is anybody familiar with GIS? Okay, I'm just going to go on this briefly because it's pretty relevant. Geographic Information System uses layers of geographic data, those big satellite photographs, to produce spatial analysis and derivative maps. The geospatial data gives you the names of the streets. Basically what GIS mapping does is it measures and documents every blade of grass, rock, water body, elevation, city growth, anything that's happening on that land or changes, it maps it, it sees it. The federal government, in turn, gives this information to the United Nations. It's turned over to them. They know every piece of our land. They know every piece of land to analyze, and they can say, look, you're having too much city growth over here, you need to do something about it. You're not having enough endangered species control or land control over here, you need to do something about it. They've got their hands on all our data because the federal government turns it over to them. So I'm just going to give you a couple of ways in which the BLM is taking resources. The BLM and other federal agencies invest in renewable energy, and like I told you, they're pushing us towards a renewable energy economy or an energy-based economy and away from a monetary. The profits from these projects go to the federal government. Idaho at this time is not required to participate in them, but our next door neighbor, Oregon, is. So because there was no required projects, I picked a couple of from California. AltaGas is a Canadian company, and Iberdrola is in Spain. There are tax credits and incentives that are given to these companies for renewable energy projects. So both of these outfits uphold UN doctrines. There's about 75 wind development companies in the United States, and on the website, there's a place where you can look at all the companies. They're all foreign. They make the money off this and they ship it outside of the United States. This money does not come back into the United States. It doesn't come back into the state in which the energy is produced. It's being ripped out of our country, which is your world economy, your economic pillar. Solar, the BLM has solar energy zones where they set up solar energy projects with foreign companies. The Western Solar Plan encompasses all of these solar zones. The first solar project brought in $5.8 million to the U.S. Treasury. Now, who are the beneficiaries of these projects? UN business partners such as Google, Morgan Stanley, and Chevron. So they're partnering with UN businesses to make money. The BLM also issues permits for renewable energy transmission lines. There's one coming here called Gateway West. There is an open comment period on it right now. I would suggest you get fully involved in it and find out what they're doing, because I looked at a map and it literally surrounds Twin Falls, goes around. Is that renewable energy or is it electricity? You know, Vicki?
Oh, it wouldn't make any difference.
It wouldn't
It
matter,
all goes
okay.
on the same transmission line.
Okay. So they're also putting these transmission lines in because the industry needs. Okay, there's the website.
Say it, please.
Idahoans Against Agenda 21. .weebly.com. So this goes off into another rabbit hole with renewable energy credits and the scam that goes with that. And Vicki's got a website. You can go and read about that. I don't have as much about it online, but basically the government pays people extra money above the rate to have these renewable energy projects, and then they have to compensate that monetary loss by charging you more higher electricity rates.
Actually, you kind of got that a little wrong.
I don't, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, the renewable energy companies in-feed electricity to the transmission
You
line.
can talk into the microphone. It's hard.
If you want, I'll stand up, take a break, stretch the legs.
Yeah, okay. The renewable energy companies, they generate electricity and they in-feed it into the utility company, into the transmission lines. And what they had to do in order to do that, the utility transmission lines used to belong to the utility companies. But in order to make it a common carrier system, so that anybody could in-feed electricity into the system, what they did is to establish a third-party management system to manage the transmission lines. So they separated the transmission lines from the utilities, made it a separate system. And when the renewable energy companies in-feed electricity, renewable electricity, supposedly, if you listen to all these environmental groups, UN and whatever, some people want to buy renewable energy as opposed to your standard regular electricity generated by somebody else, as if there's some kind of difference, but it's a political statement, apparently. And so, because there is no way to tell the difference between regular electricity and renewable electricity, this third-party management system issues renewable energy credits for electricity that's generated with renewable energy. And the people that want to buy electricity generated with renewable can buy these credits. So if you strip it all away, since there's no oversight, no audit capability over this third-party management system, what they've been given basically is a license to print money. Because we don't know how much electricity they're really generating. You know, I see these windmills out there and they're not turning all the time. So we just kind of have to take their word for it. And the subsidies for all this renewable energy comes out of your pocket, in your electric bill, and through subsidies through the EPA and so forth. So that's the story on that.
Did you want to take a 5-minute break? Just keep going?
Yeah.
Just keep going?
Unless you need to take a break.
I can go on all night. This fires me up, it makes me so angry. They're doing this to my state. So the essence of that whole deal was the BLM needs to take more land for more of this kind of activity with energy, and they figured out a way to do it. So the next subject is water. I have a really hard time narrowing this down because it is such a massive thing. They are targeting our water and they're targeting it big time. They're after it, they're taking it already. And we can't let it happen. We cannot let it happen. Let's see.
How are they taking?
That's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so in your Twin Falls 2030 vision plan, they addressed water, solid waste, irrigation, sewer, and storm drains. I'm not going to talk about all of them. The one I'm going to focus on is water, irrigation, and a little bit about storm drains, because this subject is so massive. They want to basically change the way our solid waste is managed to the point where it can be reused and you can drink it. That's UN, not Twin Falls, UN. But that's what they're working on with the storm drain water, is they're going to change it so it's potable. So Twin Falls evaluated for existing conditions, and they analyzed it and they projected some needs. So the existing conditions for Twin Falls is the lack of water, that the current wells are using maximum amounts of water. There's a consistent decrease in the amount of water. And progress needs to be based on anticipated irrigation practices. There's that future generation needs, protecting the current future. Current arsenic levels exceed allowable amounts, and I live under that rule where I live. And we're going to plan for non-potable water for irrigation. The non-potable basically means used water. It's water that's been used or is dirty in some way. So they projected the needs as being water disputes between surface and groundwater users will result in greater restrictions on both. And I just want you to keep that in mind, that they're projecting that there's going to be a lot of conflicts and disputes. And it's going to end up so nobody's got water, because that's going to come up a little bit later.
Because that Snake River just doesn't have any water.
Right.
I'm sorry?
Because that Snake River just doesn't have any water. That's why we're short.
Is that why?
I'm joking.
I'm joking too. I can play back. You know, I've been going up to Island Park for over 60 years and watched that reservoir fill, watched it get drained, watched it fill every year, every winter. I've seen that river, or that reservoir down to the very bottom where it's nothing but a stream because they drained the whole thing for various reasons. And I've also seen that same reservoir completely full in September, which is really unusual because they use that water for irrigation and downfill, and it goes down the Snake River. And we're short of water? Well, how come that reservoir is acting the same way as it was 60 years ago? Help me understand this. And I admit, I'm not a water ecologist. I'm not in that field. I don't know everything. Okay? So, but they've identified, like the UN, that there's a water scarcity. The first priority is finding water for meeting DEQ potable water standards. So again, you've got the EPA dictating to the DEQ, which in turn dictates to the counties and cities. Finding additional water sources meeting DEQ potable water standards is a priority. Convert non-potable water to potable water. I hate that word. Used water to usable water. How's that? So that means redoing your drain systems, and you know, when you get originally heavy, the water collects, taking that water and cleaning it up so you can use it again. Developing pressure irrigation systems to minimize potable water use. Now, is there any agricultural people in here? Please, good, because you can tell me if I'm on the wrong track. Change city ordinances for distribution system for pressure irrigation, pumping stations, transmission systems, we're back to the BLM, and apply to regional pressure irrigation facility, we're back to the regions. So, it's all interconnected. And additional water facilities will be needed for the future growth, you know, because you're having too many babies, folks, come on. They're projected.
Just because the other people were reporting?
No, it's because the UN says there's too many people, and this is where we're populated, we're destroying the earth, that's why.
Well, they are trying to. But the future growth around here is more importation.
Right.
Yes.
And that, they cited that the rise in employment was from, I think it was immigrants coming here to find work and stay because they did find work. I think that's in the booklet somewhere.
Isn't a lot of this here is based on reduction of population?
Yes.
A lot of these plans are contingent on the population.
It doesn't say that in there, I didn't see it in there. Okay, so storm drains, I'm just gonna bring that up for a real quick second. Existing conditions, because the UN places a lot of emphasis on storm drain water. The existing current philosophy is to limit concentration of storm water. The old part of town is using runoff ditches and drainage channels. Current new developments are using retention ponds and dry well systems, which apparently is good. And developers are required to use best management practices and stormwater pollution plans. Now, I just want to throw this in here real quick, because I don't think I put it in here anywhere. Has anybody ever heard of Patrick Wood?
Yeah.
Patrick Wood has a website, Technocracy News and Trends. He's written a book called Technocracy Rising, and he talks about how the dynamic that's being used, the methodology, one of them, being used to transform us to a scientific world is called technocracy. And it's all based on science. It's all best management and practices, or best standards. They force our kids to do evidence-based work. Everything has to have science. He's got a few videos on there. I think there's 3 one-hour videos. You really need to listen to them, because they are fascinating, and everything will just kind of click with what's going on now. Everything has to be science-based. Really, Patrick Wood is his name, just Google it. Well, don't Google it, they trace you. Use some other method. So when it says best management practices, all the science comes out of the UN, all of it. The IPCC is the International Panel for Climate Change. They're all UN. Any science that comes out is on their website, and they're the ones that are dictating it, and that's what that's talking about. Best management, UN management. So the projection of needs are change existing city ordinances for EPA implementation, increase stormwater treatment using sediment ponds, oil separated treatment facilities. So they're gonna gather up, scoop up your stormwater and reuse it.
There's something just this last week about it's not legal for you to catch your own.
That's correct, and they do get fined back east for it.
So here in.
They're doing it here? Yeah,
Last year they passed
It's
orders
true.
last year.
tell the UN. I want to just say one thing about the arsenic. You know how you have the protected species and the protected wetlands, and you can't go there because it's got to be protected? Okay, well, I'm being protected because the EPA went down to the DEQ and said, level 10 arsenic levels are too high, you have to have 8. Well, I happen to live on a community well. And so what they did is they came in and said, you can't do that, that's too high. And so we had to go on restricted water use. So incrementally, they're taking my water rights away because I don't care if I drink level 10. I'm still here, I've been drinking it for a long time. I'm still here, let me drink it. No.
They did that, they did
Yeah.
ours.
They did it, and that's what they're talking about, changing the city ordinances to match DEQ, which matches the EPA, who partners and signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations to support sustainable development goals and objectives. It's right here, you can look at it. The EPA partners with the UN and are implementing UN objectives.
How that all came about was we were at 50 parts per billion forever for a long, long time. And they lowered it arbitrarily to 10.
See, mine's at 8. Get ready, mine's at 8
Now it's down to 8.
in my area. But again, it's the same ruse as, well, we gotta protect this habitat, well, we gotta protect this bird, well, we gotta protect, okay, we gotta protect you from arsenic. I don't care if I drink arsenic, leave me alone. Okay, and so save your questions, write them down, we'll get back to it. Okay, I'm gonna go on to pressure irrigation real quick, because that's a big United Nations thing too, because it has to do with agriculture. So they identified the existing condition as isolated pressure irrigation systems. Some have been implemented, and the city is in process of developing pressure irrigation master plan. Whoever has anything to do with agriculture and irrigation, I highly recommend you get in there and you be part of this plan and watch what they're gonna do to you. From what I understand, there's different types of pressure irrigation. The people that work in that field, there is different types. Pressure, you don't know what it is?
One basic standards, what I.
Oh my gosh, okay, all right. Well, I picked one, because I thought the picture was pretty. The projection of needs for irrigation is a first priority to find additional water resources meeting DEQ requirements, which i.e. EPA, UN, reduce the amount of potable water use for, reduce the amount of fresh water for irrigation and going over to used water, changing city ordinances to include distribution systems for pressure irrigation, provide property pumping station facilities and transmission system for developments. We're back to the BLM with the transmission lines. They're putting all the infrastructure in place for this. Is to be applied to a regional pressure irrigation facility, which you don't want, which you said you didn't want, but they're going to move forward with it anyway. And I was asking somebody earlier how many towns are in the Twin Falls County. It's apparently a pretty big county, right? A lot of agricultural fields. So what they want to do is rearrange the irrigation system so that it's working on a regional basis. Purchase more water rights. Okay, so here's a picture of drip irrigation. The United Nations basis is that there's a water scarcity, and you've got that in your vision plan, that there's just not enough water. Everyone deserves clean water, and water should be shared. You should share it with your neighbors in other counties, folks. They blame water degradation for water scarcity, and they identify 3 sources of water users: urban, that's you that live here; industrial, Chobani, is that how you say it, Chobani? They probably use a lot of water for the yogurt, right? And agriculture, you water users, you. Those are the 3 problems. So taking drip irrigation as an example, water is distributed through emitters directly into the soil near the roots through a special slow release device. Right here. It comes through here and the water is pushed through these pipes down to the drip. That's a pretty complex machine up there, don't you think? It may help achieve water conservation by reducing evaporation, and deep drainage water can be more precisely applied to plant roots. And it can eliminate many diseases that are spread through irrigation water. It's adaptable to farmable slope and suitable for most soils. I just want to go bring in one thing here. No, it's later. Okay. Okay, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations has pretty much been around since the beginning of the United Nations, about 1948. They control our forests. They control a lot of resources, and they have a lot of power. And of course, the federal government is a partner with them. They define this as trickle irrigation, and they have a booklet on it. And they state in there that the cons to the negatives to drip irrigation is that it's very expensive. One of the main problems with drip irrigation is blockage from the emitters, so it is essential for irrigation water to be free of sediments, which may require filtering. So then you've got to add a bunch more equipment for filters. Blockage may also occur if the water contains algae, fertilizer deposits, and dissolved chemicals, which precipitate into calcium and iron. Filtration may remove some of the materials, but the problem may be complex to solve, therefore requiring an experienced engineer or consultation with an equipment dealer. Now, why am I telling you all this?
It's ridiculous.
I'll see you there.
Because you have a large agricultural area around here, right? People that have been farming for years, right? They know what they're doing. Not good enough. So here's a scam. We've got our educational clusters, okay? Servicing the local industries for workforce development. And we've got Common Core with STEM, science and technology. So they're gonna identify that little pre-kindergartner. Oh, he seems smart enough. We're gonna educate him in the direction of being an engineer who can handle drip irrigation system. Yes,
They're gonna bring in H-1B immigrants to do.
they're gonna do that too. They're gonna do that too. But in the event that we Americans, kids, are not smart enough, that will be used more. But we might have a sharp tack in the box that is an American kid that we can shove in that direction. That it's all part of the scam to make everything scientific and the technology of it, which is what Patrick Wood talks about, and to control the agricultural resources. And in our little human settlement, and our residential clusters with local produce, they'll strip off this row to feed Twin Falls, but they're gonna sell that other row to somebody else, because they're gonna bring in agribusiness to manage all this agriculture for you, because you don't know how to do it. Now, this is actually happening in the Valley County plan. There's a bunch of agriculture up there as well, and farming. They're gonna bring in University of Idaho to help these farmers who just don't know what they're doing, learn how to produce agriculture, because they've got that industry cluster up there. You guys in your plan haven't advanced that far, but it's gonna be in the revision, I can guarantee it. So we need an experienced engineer. It can easily be automated, requiring specialist skills. And if it breaks down, the crop may suffer quickly. So if you don't have the engineer, there goes your crop. Water savings are there. They did admit that drip irrigation is not a substitute for other proven methods. It's best suited to areas where water quality is marginal or of poor quality, where water and labor is expensive, or where high-value crops require frequent water applications. And I don't, what do you grow around alfalfa? Hey? Grain? Oh, grain? Did you say grain? Oh, no. Do they require a lot of water? Do they? Okay. So, there's all kinds of reasons for them to come in. Now, we'll go back to UN business partnerships. A couple of UN business partners are Monsanto. Anybody heard of them? Cargill, you've heard of them? They're a UN business partner. So they're going to come to you, Mr. Farmer, and say, in this master irrigation plan, we want you to go to drip irrigation because it's a form of pressure irrigation. It costs $500,000. Are you going to be able to afford that? Too bad. It's now in the city ordinance. It's required. You're going to have to sell. Just the same as Mr. Rancher, you can't graze your cattle there anymore. Too bad. Go find somewhere else. And puts ranchers out of business. They're headed to you. They want control of the agriculture, and I mentioned that before as one of the priority areas. So they're going to force you out of business, and then they're going to bring in their business buddy, Monsanto, or is Nestle an agribusiness? Nestle? I think it is. They're going to bring in their water. I thought they made chocolate.
Yes, water is
Okay. Nonetheless, it could be China because there's a lot of foreign companies belong to the UN. Yeah, redistribution of wealth, changing the world economy. That's how they're going to do it. They're going to shove you out because you can't afford to do this. And they're going to bring in an agribusiness to take over for you, and it's going to be part of the UN. Does that make sense? No?
No. Can I tell you something about this? This kind of systems like this, that was the plan for the global economy.
I just said
The United States.
foreign businesses.
Yeah, the United States was going to be the manufacturer and designer of these clean energy systems, eco-efficient systems.
Right.
And, to sell in the global marketplace. But I
Can't
mean,
that be part of it too?
what do you mean?
Selling it plus bringing it in,
Right.
forcing farmers out?
Well, yes, that's exactly what it is. The way this works, it's called demand push. Means that they are pushing this on people.
Yes,
They are creating the demand through regulatory
yes,
racketeering.
yes. Yes, 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 because your federal government partners with the United Nations, and that's what the United Nations wants. Per the UN NGO, International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage, they have an organization for that, it's called ICID. Pressurized irrigation systems are costly, out of the reach of smallholder farms. Pressure irrigation systems range from sophisticated computer-controlled setups with high startup costs. Their use has largely been confined to large farmers or commercial farming. It's going to push the local farmer out, who's been in this, farming's been in his family for generations. Ticks me off. Yeah, this is just one example.
Why is the farmland disappearing? I've been in like different places and it just keeps on
I'm gonna touch on that.
squeezing.
I'm gonna
out.
touch on that. I'll get to that. This won't work. All right, here we go. Where is it? There. Okay, United Nations water organizations. The only reason I gave one slide on this is because I ran out of room. Wow. These are all UN water organizations. These UN organizations are working very hard, extremely hard, to take away your water and control it. And the federal government is doing the same thing. I'll go over that in a minute. So you've got the World Bank, FAO, Global Water Partnership, UN Water, Water for Life, World Health Organization, UNEP, UNDP. You cannot believe how aggressive they're getting with water and taking it from you. And they're actually taking it from you and you don't even know it. UN Water is an interagency coordination mechanism for fresh water and sanitation issues. And so they're coordinating all these agencies together to work together in different areas. It encompasses all aspects of fresh water, including surface and groundwater resources. It includes quality and quantity, development, assessment, management, monitoring, and use, including domestic, that's you, agriculture, and ecosystem. There's that ecosystem word again. Why does that keep popping up? Sanitation, access to and use of sanitation and interactions between sanitation and fresh water. They're big into toilets, sewage. They have several thematic priority areas, including transboundary waters, water quality, which is out of the United Nations Environmental Program, and that's where your arsenic comes in. You deserve to drink parts per billion, 8, not 10. Water supply and basic sanitation, water and climate change, and water scarcity.